6:30 p.m. I am your host, Lynette Laveau.
Here we go. Hi there. Welcome to another exciting edition of Cambridge Inside Out, the sequel. My name is Robert Winters, and I'm here with my co-host.
My name is Susanna Sagat. It's the Tuesday after November 5th, Tuesday after the election. So we got a lot to talk about.
I think we certainly do. I thought what we might do tonight is first do a little walking through of what actually happened last week. Not spend a tremendous amount of time on it, but at least sort of point out some of the highlights. And because of some of the somewhat controversial aspects of the very close election results, we may want to say a word or two about that. And then, depending on the time, we'll also talk a little bit about some of the technicalese that only the math geeks like me really love.
That's the part I want to get to.
Okay.
So let's get to that part.
Want to get to that?
Yeah.
All right, let's do that.
But let's start with where you were starting.
All right. So I thought what we might do is just queue up the actual election results. We'll first do the city council results and
You ready?
And just sort of walk around through. So here you go. Now you may have to do a little scrolling right here. Actually, this very first page here, what you're seeing here is just the output from the Choice Plus Pro software, which is what we use in the Cambridge elections. The front page just shows how many valid ballots, how many candidates ran, what the quota was, right? And I think this is actually Oops. I think you're actually looking at the
I'm
wrong
looking at
one,
the wrong
actually.
thing.
So looking at
I
the
already
wrong one.
started wrong.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you go around the very bottom, 2003. That's the one. There
That's
we
the
go. All
one.
right, now we go.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. So this is the results from Wednesday. Even though it says preliminary at the top, it's what we refer to as the unofficial results. By unofficial, we mean there are still a few overseas absentee ballots and provisional ballots that will be considered this Friday in what will, I'm sure, be a very exciting meeting of the Election Commission. So it was at this one here that was determined from the, what does that say, 17,737 ballots. If you divide by 10 and round up, you get 1774. That was the quota. There were 102 invalid ballots, primarily blank ballots and ballots that just simply didn't have any valid choices. So if you click up there where it says first count.
Absolutely.
All righty. So what we see here is just the #1 vote distribution. I mean, this is the ultimate accounting, in a sense, for all the #1s that you saw on all the political signs for all that time. I hope the viewers can actually make this out. I think they should be able to see it just fine, but we'll see. And you see here in this particular election, the quota was 1,700 some odd. There was exactly one candidate, Leland Chung, who surpassed the election quota and was elected in the first count. He has 2,389 ballots, 2,389 ballots, which is actually 615 more than he needed to be elected. So, according to the Cambridge rules, he has to give them back. So let's see if we can go to the next page. You actually just got to scroll up where it says next count. All right, so if you move over here. So what we see now here, and this is actually a piece that's worth comment. At the end of Tuesday, when there were about 700 fewer ballots left, the numbers were a little bit different. But what happened here is because of the method of surplus transfer that we use in the Cambridge elections, there was some rather dramatically different results. And we may actually highlight those in a little bit later. But what you see here are the numbers, for example, with Minka van Bizikum getting about 68 ballots. That's 16 more than she got the previous one. The person who's going to end up in a very close race at the very end, Nadeem, has 30. I think he dropped about 4. So there was a sort of a net swing of about 20 ballots from Tuesday to Wednesday, which really served to tighten the race. But you can kind of see just from the 615 ballots from Chung that there's certain patterns, but not that strong a pattern. The stronger candidates tend to get more ballots. The weaker candidates tend to get fewer ballots. There are some patterns that can be discerned, but basically it's kind of hard to read from that. So let's go to the next one here. So now we have brought down Leland to quota. The next few, we'll probably go through these relatively quick. There are candidates who got fewer than 50 votes. So according to the Cambridge rules, going back to 1941, anybody with fewer than 50 ballots is eliminated in a single round. So there were write-in ballots. There were, and 2 candidates who failed to hit the 50 vote threshold. So they'll all be defeated in this same round, and their votes will then be transferred to continuing candidates. There aren't that many ballots to transfer, so they tend to just sort of, scatter like the wind a bit. Not too much in the way of discernible
And Leland
patterns.
can't get any more,
And
because
Leland,
he's out.
that's right. Once
He's won.
any candidate has been elected or defeated, they can no longer receive ballots according to the Cambridge rules.
Okay,
So let's jump to the next round, round 4. So we'll actually go through some of these with relative dispatch.
Okay.
James Williamson had 78. No real discernible pattern to where they went. Then we defeat Leslie Phillips. There are few little patterns. There were 97 ballots to give at that point. You might notice Sam Seidel got 14, fellow mid-Cambridge person. Denise Simmons, there are certain affiliations that one might gain from that. A woman candidate, Kristen von Hoffman, picks up 10, and then it kind of drops off from there. So you start to see, even at this point here, a certain amount of patterns about how there were affinities among voters, so that they were voting for candidates who were, at least according to some criteria, similar to the one who's just been defeated. So let's move on to James Lee. Now, James Lee, again, kind of hard to read this. He was a new candidate, not necessarily, I don't think many voters really affiliated him with other candidates. So there's something of a random distribution after this. So let's move on to count 7. The exciting count 7 is when Ellie Yarden is defeated, had 120 votes. I'll say something to Ellie. He's a Green Party member, very much left of center. You see there were certain kind of patterns, I guess also social justice was a big theme for him always. So you see people like Dennis Banzan, Nadeem Mazen, Minka pick up some votes, but not that much in the way of a really discernible pattern, really. Now, Gary Mello, who lives near Central Square, Gary, had his political stance. He was somewhat critical of some of the way things are run in the city. So one might argue that his ballots would go to candidates who shared a similar kind of worldview. So in this particular case, Dennis Carlone picked up 26 of those 124, and then it kind of dies off pretty quickly from there. All right, so let's move on, and to count 9 is Luis Vasquez, again, a resident, born and raised in Cambridge, lives in Area 4, actually Wellington-Harrington area of the city, I believe now. So he had 291 ballots, which include his original number 1s, plus any that he had picked up in subsequent rounds. If you look at there, the biggest beneficiary there was another Latino candidate, Dennis Benzin. Gets 48 out of the 291, and is at least twice as good as any of the other candidates who were recipients of ballots at that point. But they tend to go around. You'll see a candidate like Mark McGovern gets 21. Again, Mark McGovern, another born and raised Canterbridgian. So you see a certain affinity to people who were born and raised in here, a little bit. All right? Now, in count 10 is when Mushtaq Mirza was defeated. That one actually is a little bit interesting in that of the 325 ballots, a little shy of 100 of them I think were exhausted, which is actually at the bottom, but 102 of them went to Nadeem Mazen. And that is, I think, without a doubt, the fact that they are sort of a religious affinity. Both are Muslim. And you can kind of see here that some of the voters who would have been voting for Mushtaq most likely were also voting for Nadeem for that particular reason. All right, so we move on to count 11, Janaki House. I find these ones interesting here. This was the year when 2 prominent women left the council, and there were several women candidates who arose. It was Kristen von Hoffman and Janaki House. So, if you'd asked me several weeks ago, what do you think is going to happen here, you would think that there would be a lot of affinity of women voting for women candidates. But in fact, of these, when Janaki went out here, I think this is not a very large effect, but it is measurable that little slate that was thrown together late in the campaign with Nadeem Mazen, Dennis Carlone, and Janaki House is probably a little bit reflected here in the fact that there's a little bit of a bias toward Nadeem Mazen and Dennis Carlone getting 66 and 63 votes respectively. Minka getting 54. I think in the absence of such a slate, Minka probably would have gotten considerably more in this transfer. All right. Okay. So let's move on to the next one, who I think is also another woman candidate. Yep. So Kristen von Hoffman. Now, Kristen, sustainability coordinator for the Cambridge Public Schools, very, very much pro-environment. If ever there was a candidate who I would have associated with other candidates, another candidate in this field, it would have been Kristen and Minka van Buzikum, and that is reflected. There are 514 ballots to give, of which Minka gets the lion's share or I should say the lioness's share at 78. But one might argue that it probably should have been even higher, but they did seem to scatter around to many of the other candidates.
Exhausted? Oh, there's only 45 exhausted.
There are 45 ballots that didn't have any additional choices at that stage.
Okay.
All right, so we move on to the next one, which is Logan Leslie. Logan is a Harvard student. He's also, I think he probably is the only registered Republican in the race, fiscal conservative in terms of his stance. So it's kind of hard to see exactly where they went, but I guess David Marr is definitely the chief recipient with 69 ballots. So you can at least see some kind of affinity. I also know that there are certainly some Republicans who find David to be one of the more acceptable, fiscally level-headed counselors. So I guess that is borne out in these transfers. So we'll move on to the next. Now Jefferson Smith, prominent Democratic Party local player. Kind of hard to read exactly what affinities he would have with existing candidates. His campaign was largely independent of everything else. The chief beneficiaries here are Nadeem Mazen, which is a little hard to figure, but maybe this is something having to do with relative ages. It's quite possible there were younger voters voting for the younger voters. Minka gets 84 ballots, and then it kind of drops off quickly from
72
there.
exhausted.
72, so it's still not that many exhausted ballots. So we move on to the next one. Now with Sam Seidel, who's again a former city councilor and resident of Mid-Cambridge. At this point, he had 935 ballots to transfer. And much of what you see is somewhat predictable. You see, similar candidates, I think, in terms of philosophy and appeal. Minka definitely picks up more than others here. So she's rising in the ranks with some of these transfers, picking up from all of these sort of intermediate level candidates. Mark McGovern also, a fellow Mid-Cambridge appeal. He was very involved with the Ward 6 group.
Now, Mark couldn't have gotten more than 34, right? Because
David Marr got 34.
No,
More
he can't get more than 34.
Very good point. The truth is that
135 exhausted.
Yep, in the previous rounds, nobody else had been elected. This is the first round in count 15, when we're actually starting to get some pretty serious numbers behind all these candidates. And what you see is David Marr actually reaches quota. He receives 34 of those 935 ballots. Chances are he would have received more, except that once you hit quota under the Cambridge rules, that's it. You stop, and then any subsequent ballots, and this again is an issue of ballot order, would be transferred to not the second preferences, but maybe third, fourth, whatever the next available preference is. So and at this stage, it's probably worth mentioning, at this point you'll see that at this point there's 250, it's a significant margin between Minka van Buzikum at 10th and Ken Reeves at 11th. So that wasn't a close one. So at this point, incumbent Ken Reeves is defeated, and the ballots are then transferred. Now, again, as one might expect, as a black man, many of the votes from Ken Reeves will transfer to other candidates of color. So you see Denise Simmons with 242. She becomes elected. So
she could have gotten more, too.
They're very, very possible that many more of them would have gone to her, but she became elected during that round. Dennis Benzan also picks up a significant number. And at that point, they just sort of scatter around to some of the continuing candidates. It's probably worth scrolling down to the bottom just a little bit, because you'll see here at the bottom, and what it indicates is that in this round, the 15th round, the 16th round, you notice the actual order of election is listed at the bottom. Denise was the first one elected off of the Reeves transfers, followed by Toomey, then Dennis Benzan, and at that point, Minka is in last place. Now, for the business that happened later this week, this is actually a pretty significant round. So let's actually, why don't you scroll back up here a little bit here.
Yep.
The last round is actually just a formality of just transferring everyone else to fill in, bring everybody up to quota. At this point here, you see 5 candidates elected. There are, then Mark McGovern is easily elected, pretty close, but he's not there yet. And then you see what many people have been talking about the last few days, which is only a 20-vote spread from Craig Kelly at 1560. 7 down from that is Dennis Carlone. another 7, is that 7 down to Nadim Mazen, and then another 6 to Minka van Buzikum.
Wow.
So it's 4 candidates within 20 votes of each other. Minka, unfortunately, is in the 10th place at that point, so under the rules, she would then be defeated, and the ballots would then subsequently transfer, which would then pretty much immediately bring everybody, you might as well just click it to go to the last slide here, bring everybody up to quota. So let's go back on the air here for a little bit and just sort of say a quick word about this. So anyway, that's the sort of more detailed look at this, rather than just announcing the winners. I thought people should at least hear a little word or two about that. There were some things that I think might be noteworthy about it. I mean, not that I'm sort of the be-all, end-all of prediction making or soothsaying or anything else in here.
You're pretty high up there in my book.
All right, thanks. But I had, prior to the election, sort of taken a look at who I thought was going to fish first, second, third, fourth. For the most part, they're pretty right on. The significant deviations for me were that Craig Kelly, Minka van Buzikum actually did somewhat worse than I had thought they would. I think that may very well be an effect of the that slate that was put together, which basically sort of brought a lot of votes that might have gone to people like Minka or Craig, and instead plopped them onto Dennis Carlone, Nadim Mazen, which then, of course, caused them to do better than would have otherwise been expected. Another thing that I've been saying for the last few weeks was that if the voter turnout had been somewhere in the vicinity of maybe 16,000, which is what it had been in the last few elections, it would have been good news for incumbents. But that if the voter turnout went up as high as 18,000, which is what I thought it would, and it came really close to that, then that's really a big wild card. That tends to mean that, at least that's an indication that some new candidates, or old candidates, are going out there beating the bushes, bringing out new voters. And with that, you could essentially go out and manufacture your own quota in order to actually get elected. I'm going to speculate and say that that was a big factor in Nadim Mazen apparently being the 9th person elected, is based on a lot of new voters. That's again, I'd love to hear other people's point of view about that, but that seems to me to be one of a number of factors that seems to have led to that result. All right. So anyway, that's the city council race as it is, and we'll certainly want to say a few more words about that in a bit. But tell you what, let's do a quick run through of the school committee.
Okay.
There's nothing particularly controversial about it.
Right here?
Yeah, that's it, and we got to cue it up.
Okay.
All right.
There
So
we
let's
go.
see.
Here we go.
All righty. Now, in the school committee, again, it was there were fewer ballots here because, as is often the case, there are a fair number of people they didn't really care about school committee, so they just they voted a blank ballot. So there were a lot of invalid ballots, over 1,000 invalid ballots, primarily blanks. Their quota is 1/7 of the valid votes to elect 6 candidates. So in this case, it's 2,370 votes. All right, so we do that. We might as well sort of click to the first count. I don't know how many people, but I actually felt that in my predictions, I thought Patty Nolan would finish first, Freddie second, Fran Cronin third, Mervyn, Kathleen Kelly, then Richard Harding. Some did better, some did worse, and apparently, according to the number ones, I was pretty spot on about Patty and Freddie. And the switches as Mervyn, I thought might finish fourth, finish sixth. I thought Richard wouldn't do nearly as well, but Richard Harding actually did quite well. He came very, very close to reaching election quota on the first round. So what did I know, right? So anyway, that was the rankings, and I think Patty Nolan did spectacularly well in terms of number one vote totals. The quota, as I said, was it 2,000 something, but she just soared way past that, many votes to give. So let's go to the next count and just sort of see. So she had 1,549 ballots to give to other continuing candidates. And you can see some of the chief recipients in this. And by the way, Freddie Frantini had already been elected at this point, but 2 candidates become elected on Patty's transfers. Kathleen Kelly, I'm sure, picked up quite a few, and Richard Harding to become elected at this point here. But a lot of ballots went to Mervyn Osborne, some of this may also be the result of people voting relatively short ballots where they didn't rank all 9 candidates. So certain candidates who were incumbents maybe got a little bit of an advantage.
So Fred had no
Because he had reached quota on the first count.
Oh, that's right.
Right, so he'll also, in the next round, we might as well jump to that. Freddie's got
there's his.
almost 500 surplus ballots to give, so
Yep.
those get passed around. At this point here, you've elected 4 people, you've defeated some write-ins, and actually you haven't really defeated anybody to speak of yet, but there are fewer and fewer people who can receive ballots, so you'll start to see more and more ballots. Well, you can't exhaust ballots on surplus distribution, but you will on subsequent rounds. But you can kind of see not too much of a pattern with Freddie's ballots. So then we move on here. This is a relatively short one compared to the city council race. So at this point, you get rid of the write-ins, and you're down just to the actual listed candidates on the ballot. Lecce was the last. He's defeated. Ballots transfer up, and then John Holland would be defeated. We transfer up. At this point, it left Joyce Gerber as the 7th person, and with only 6 to be elected. And so those are transferred, and they bring everybody up to the quota of 2370. All right. So it wasn't really a close margin. So we might as well go back on the air. Let's go live here.
Here we go.
All right. So yes, on Friday when they're opening up these additional provisional ballots and overseas absentee ballots. Yeah, there'll be some for school committee as well as city council, but there's no way on earth that anything is going to be changed in the school committee race. But this ridiculously narrow, record-breaking narrow margins for city council is sure to make for somewhat exciting Friday festivities. Many people are speculating, and I think it is fair to say that come after Friday, if Minka is still in 10th place, she'll petition for a recount. If it happens that in fact when the ballots are distributed a little bit differently, she surpasses Nadeem or one of the other candidates in that close near tie, then I'm sure one of the other candidates will quickly gather up signatures and petition for a recount. So at this point here, it seems inevitable that there will probably be a recount. One might even argue that when election results are this close, it should be automatic anyway. Candidates probably shouldn't even have to petition for it at this stage. So anyway, that's sort of a rundown of what happened, right?
It doesn't take much to petition for a recount, though. It's not a great struggle.
That's right. I think I had mistakenly thought it was like a 10-day margin for petitioning, but it's actually 3 days after the announcement of the official results. So there's some question, is that 3 business days, or since the results will be known now on Friday, because the federal law requires that you have to leave 10 days after election days for overseas absentee ballots. 3 days, does that mean Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or does that mean Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? I don't think anybody knows just yet. So, but regardless, I'm sure they're going to be candidates probably have their petition ready with the signatures, and they'll just drop it on the table on Friday. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. What makes this all very, very interesting is that it really does bring to light some of the questions. Sort of the one awkward question people ask when they ask about Cambridge's PR elections is, it's easy enough to explain the series of runoffs. But always the difficult question is when people ask about how do you do the surplus distribution. If a candidate has more ballots than they're permitted to keep, they're over quota, how do you pick the ballots that are whole ballots, at least under the current rules, that are to be transferred to other continuing candidates? So I thought I was going to, I'll bring my demonstration here.
And then just to add to that, if there's a recount, how do you do it?
Exactly.
So we'll talk about that.
We'll touch upon those right now. So let's just pretend this is not actually. I forget how many ballots did Leland have? 2,300, some hard like that. But basically, the numbers work out pretty nicely in that he had pretty close to 2,400 ballots, and quota was, I think, pretty close to 1,800. So what that means is he gets to keep approximately 3/4 of his ballots.
2389.
Right. So the way it would have worked back in the original Plan E charter was a method of choosing the surplus ballots it was based on the city of Boulder, Colorado. back then, what you basically would do is say, if this is your, let's see, I guess if you can see that, if that was your 2,400 ballots right here,
That's all your number ones.
all your number one ballots, they would have actually arrived here in sequence based on what they call the random sequence, the random draw of precincts. So in this year, I think Ward 4, Precinct 3 would have been at the bottom, and 6-1 would have been, where I live, is right on the very top.
Now, is that also in the order people voted?
No, but it's
Okay.
just, the only thing that's guaranteed to be in order is
the
just
precincts.
the precincts. And
Okay.
then the ballots can be whatever they are, however they came to get in there. Now, under the Boulder method, what you would do is you'd say, you'd sort of count down and say, okay, we get up here to quota, which was what, what was it again? Quota
Oops, sorry.
was, it was 1774. So you go over here out of the approximately 2,400 ballots, say 1774, those are the ones you get to keep, and then you grab the ones right off the top. Now, this is the Boulder method. We don't use this. And they would just take those, and they would just look at them and say, okay, who's number 2? Okay, boom, 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 boom. And they would transfer to continuing candidates based on the second choice of just these ballots. Now, people came to believe that this was not a fair system because
It would be a specific precinct.
yeah, the only ballots that have this little extra life are the ones that are at the back end of that series. So they said, we don't want to do that. We want it to be more uniformly distributed across the city. Right, I think are we getting down to about a
We
minute
got
to
1
go?
minute, yeah.
So we'll actually continue this in a bit here. So what they did was they invented, so I'll just tell you what it is and then we'll continue in a few minutes. They tell the Cincinnati method. He gets to keep 3 and give up a quarter of his ballots, 3-1, 3-1. So you would just go Cincinnati method, 1, 2, 3, he keeps, 4th one, he gives.
Now, that percentage, because
1, 2,
that'll
3.
add up to what is left
That's
over.
right. Gives one here. And so it'd be basically every 4th ballot. Now, once you get through the whole deck, you go back into the beginning and you shadow and you continue it. So I think on that note, since we're sort of getting down to the 20-second mark,
And then we're getting to the exciting part
And then
that
we'll
I'm
get to-
looking forward
then
to.
this is where I get to seriously geek out. Okay?
This is a great part.
All right.
Don't miss it. So
All right.
go take a break and come right back,
That's
because this is the good part coming
Yeah,
up.
go get yourself a sandwich and bring me something too. Okay.
This is Cambridge Inside. And